So recently I made a video about the 5 things that I don't worry about when writing my first draft, because I personally try to write my first drafts for speed because most of the times they're garbage and I just need to get something on the page before I worry about fixing it. But there are still things that I do think about and worry about when I'm writing first drafts. I don't aimlessly write them, I still write them with a purpose, even if my prose is messy and I say they're garbage, but I don't really want them to be total garbage. So today, I'm gonna make a video sharing the 5 things I do think about and worry about when writing my first drafts, so that when I do ultimately have a messy first draft, it's at least usable and it tells the skeleton of the story that I ultimately want to be telling. Before we get into the content, hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Claire Fraise and I am an award-winning young adult author who makes videos on this channel sharing the actionable writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. Everybody's writing process is different and your journey to discovering your best writing process will differ from everybody else's. So it's my goal on this channel just to share the resources and advice and courses that I personally found the most helpful when I was learning how to write. Everything I share in this video, just like in all of my videos, is only my opinion and only spoken from my own personal experience. What works for me may not work for you, but it also might work for you, and the only way for you to figure that out is to experiment with different things. So with that being said, let's get into the content. The first thing that I do worry about when writing my first draft is the conflict of my story. Every book has a protagonist who wants something, an antagonistic force that's standing in their way, and a series of challenges that they need to overcome in order to get what they want or need. This struggle between the protagonist and the antagonistic forces is called the conflict of your story. This is really what your story is. A story about a woman going to the grocery store to buy a bottle of milk would be very boring if all she did in the story was get in the car, drive to the grocery store, get the bottle of milk, and go home. In order for that story to be interesting, you would want her to get a flat tire, to encounter a bunch of garden gnomes who are alive and who are trying to kill her, or she'd want to discover an evil person who has decided to buy up all of the milk in the city and prevent anybody from buying milk, and then she has to go and get into a huge fight with this tyrannical milk overlord in order to get the jar of milk. That zany story would be more interesting to follow than the first story because there's conflict and there's stuff happening. Before I sit down to write my first draft, I already want to have a good idea of what my protagonist wants, what is going to be standing in their way, and what the major challenges they're going to need to face to get it is. I may not know every single challenge that they're going to have to go through, but I at least want to have an idea of what the major conflict is in the story, so that when I'm moving through it, I have an idea as to what's going to be pushing back on my protagonist as they're trying to move toward their goal. The second thing that I would like to know before I start writing my first draft is my major plot beats and structure. I identify as a hardcore plotter. While I do like discovery writing, and I've discovered recently that I am more of an exploratory writer than I thought I was, I still need to know the overall structure of my book so that I know where I'm going as I'm writing. If I don't know where I'm going, I typically lose momentum and I stop writing somewhere around the middle of the book, and I get really frustrated and overwhelmed by all of the stuff that I need to keep track of, and I stop writing. So it really helps me to have big flag posts in my outline. I might not know every single little tiny conflict that they're going to have to go through in order to reach the ultimate goal or the ultimate battle, but I do know that they first meet the villain at this point in the story, and they have their first rescue attempt at this point in the story, and the climax happens here. I always know what I'm writing towards, even if I don't know every single thing that happens on my way there. The first ideas that I have for my book's outline are usually not the best ideas that I come up with over the course of my writing process. I can think that I have a really amazing outline and think that I've just outdone myself with the brainstorming, but usually after the book has sat in my brain for a while and I've actually written a couple of drafts, I will realize that there are better ways to do things, or there are more creative ways to solve problems, or there are opportunities that I didn't see when I was writing my outline. So don't marry your outline, don't become extremely attached to it because it will more than likely change. but have a general idea of where you're going. At least know maybe the conflict and the ending if you don't really like plotting, because that will help give you a direction, and that direction can always change, but it will help push you through the draft, because first drafts are pretty hard to complete, let's be honest. The third thing that I like to know before writing my first draft is basic characterization. I like to know who my characters are. I always get to know my characters a lot more as I'm writing my first draft. I might just know some things about them at the beginning, and then by the end of my first draft, I'll have a very clear picture of who they are. But I want to have a basic idea of who my characters are before I go into drafting. Just like bare bones. I don't usually do the 100 question character questionnaires. I feel like that's a little overkill. And for my first draft, I don't usually like to preempt all of the backstory and all of their worst fears and all of their horrible, embarrassing childhood memories, because I don't really know them that well, and I don't know who they need to be in order to make the story happen. So I typically like to discover that, and I just try to get to know them and treat the first draft as me getting to know them, and then I can go back and edit after that. For example, when I first started writing my book, They Stay, all I really knew about my characters was that Shiloh was kind of a stubborn, tough girl who grew up in an abusive household. Francesca was a Luna Lovegood type, gentle soul who saw ghosts in the cemetery. Miles was Shiloh's nerdy boyfriend, and Jonah was a bad boy with a troubled past who secretly actually is very soft and sensitive. While these like one sentence bullet points about the characters on the surface haven't really changed, they have gotten a lot deeper as I've started writing it. And I have discovered so much more about who they are as people and why they are the way they are as I've gotten to know them. I also write from the first person present tense point of view, and so every single POV character has to have their own unique voice, and these voices had to come about very naturally as I was writing my first and second and third drafts. They were not there originally. They are stronger in every book that I write. Like, their voices in book 3 are more distinctive than they were in book 1 because I'm still getting to know them. But I am, keeping it consistent over the course of my series. But as I spend more time with them, I get to know them. The fourth thing I like to have a grasp on as I'm writing is what everything looks like. I am a very visual writer. I like to see things in my head as I'm writing, just images and places and characters. I like imagining everything happening in my head as a movie, and I try to distill that and put that on the page as I'm writing. So I like to have a general broad strokes idea of what everything looks like. I typically discover new details, and sometimes the location descriptions change, but I like to know what my characters look like. I like to know what my places look like. I like to be able to picture all of them. So my test is that I close my eyes and I really just pretend I can stand up and like look around the room. And if I really feel like I can see that room and be in that room, then I can start writing it. And the last thing that I like to know or determine before I write my first draft is my writing routine. I like to set daily word count goals because it's really hard for me to get through my first drafts. I used to love writing first drafts. I used to find the creative process freeing. I used to just love the fact that nobody else was going to ever read it, and it was just me in the safe space being creative and coming up with all sorts of different ideas, and I used to just get so much enjoyment out of it. Recently, in the past couple of books I've done, that has not been the case. I have found it very difficult for me to get my first draft written because my brain immediately jumps to being perfectionistic and trying to edit it, and I get self-conscious and I want it to be perfect right off the bat, which first drafts never are. So I've found it a little bit more difficult to complete them recently, and so my word count goals are really, really important to me because I need to get those words on paper and I need to get that draft out. And by focusing on just getting the word count done, I'm able to keep that momentum going. In my head, it doesn't matter if the 3,000 words I get that day are bad, but at least I got 3,000 words and I'm closer to finishing the book. I create habits that optimize my speed. I create writing routines that help optimize my speed. I get all of these things in place before I start writing just to make it easier once I'm actually actively writing my first draft. Personally, my writing routine is that I always write in the morning. I use daily word count goals. I write in sprints, so I will try to do 15-minute sprints where I target 500 words, and I'll do those until I have met my daily word count goal. I listen to certain soundtracks that I'm writing. I love listening to horror soundtracks, and also the Harry Potter soundtrack really helps me write for some reason. I love drinking coffee in the morning. I will usually write at the same time that I'm drinking my coffee to help immediately put me in the right headspace to write, because I think subconsciously at this point I associate coffee with writing. So all those things are already in place before I actually start actively trying to get that first draft on paper, because my main focus is speed. It's not about the quality of the work. And I know that a lot of people do edit as they go and they find a lot of success editing as they go, but I have tried that and I am not one of those authors. So if you are able to do that, hats off to you. But if you're like me and you get in your head and really need to just focus on speed, then that is what typically works for me. So those are the 5 things I figure out before I start writing my first draft. Most other things like prose and major theme and the actual structure of all of my scenes and whether or not every single scene advances the plot and all of my character arcs, all of that comes later. I don't worry about that when I'm writing my first draft. I just try to tell the story, and then I can turn on the analytical part of my brain and look at it objectively and then figure out what I need to do in order to change my garbage draft into something resembling the story I want to tell. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to like it and also subscribe to my channel. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, my name is Claire Fraise, and I make videos sharing writing and craft tips that worked for me in the hopes that they also work for you. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like it and subscribe to my channel. I hope you have a fantastic week, and as always, happy writing.